Hello everybody, this is Voodoo G, and today we are going to talk about Native Instruments' Razor. Not only is it my favorite synthesizer, but it is the first synthesizer I ever purchased. Of course, apart from the ones that were included in the FL Studio Fruity edition. But that's right, this little synthesizer is what I used for sound design before I had anything more powerful. And it is what helped me understand many of the principles that go into sound designing and sound as a whole. For starters, Razor is an additive synthesizer. In case you don't know this, essentially any sound can be created using enough sine waves at the right frequencies. In fact, sound is basically made out of a bunch of sine waves. Additive synthesizers such as Razor make use of this property of sound by just creating a sound from a bunch of sine waves. Instead of creating a waveform and then cutting away at that waveform using filters and a bunch of effects, Razor basically emulates these properties by manipulating the individual sine waves that make up the sound. Apart from being incredibly precise, this type of synthesis allows for some manipulation that other synthesizers cannot do. For instance, certain sounds that are above the cutoff of the quote-unquote filter can still be brought back after the filter using certain effects. That's because the filter is imaginary. It doesn't really work like a filter. It doesn't actually cut off anything, it just makes some of the partials, or sine waves, quieter. And this is crucial, because sometimes you want to cut off a bunch of frequencies and just bring some of them back during a sound design process. While this is basically impossible in a subtractive synthesizer, in an additive synthesizer this is very easy to do. By the way, when I'm saying something is impossible, I generally don't mean that it is impossible to achieve this type of sound with another device. I am saying that this method might be impossible to apply in another synthesizer. So let's get started. In order to run Razor, you need to load it into Native Instruments Reactor or Reactor Player. The layout for Razor is relatively simple. You've got three main sections which are divided into smaller sections. So let's go through them top to bottom. In the top section you have the master controls for your instruments. Here you can control the pitch, the fine tune, the glide, the output volume, phase offset, randomization amount, play mode, meaning poly or mono, and single trigger. You've got the big spectrum up here. There's also a button for your macro controls, and on the right side you have some extra sound modulation options. In the middle section you have your advanced synthesizer controls, and in the bottom section you've got your modulation options. Razor has two oscillator modules, two filter modules, a dissonance effect module, a stereo effect module, and a module called dynamics and shaping. This, by the way, is the only module that uses actual effects instead of additive synthesis. For the oscillators we've got some conventional and some unconventional oscillator options. Razor behaves very much like a wavetable synthesizer. For instance, you've got oscillator types like formant and mixed pitchbend, which basically work like wavetables. But you also have a waveform like primes that only adds prime number partials to the sound. Honestly, I could talk about the waveforms for Razor all day, but if I was to do that, well, what really do you want me to explain? These things are math. Math.
Oh my god, no.
So let's quickly move on to the filters. Here we've got low pass ramps, low pass board, low pass phaser, low pass dirty, band pass, EQ decay, vowel, vocoder, formant, and formant decay. That's for filter 1. Because actually, filter 2 has a completely different set of filters. We've got low pass, high pass, band reject, comp peak, comp notch, multimode dirty, phaser, waterbed, pseudo pitchbend, gaps, and unisono noise. Oh, by the way, yeah, that said vocoder. You can have a vocoder as your filter. It just turns the filter into a vocoder, so the waveform that comes from oscillator 1 and 2 is getting filtered by your voice. Oh, by the way, not only that, but it is a really good sounding vocoder. Like, it is one of the clearest sounding vocoders I've ever heard.
I am a vocoder.
Did I mention that Razor is my favorite synthesizer? I think I should mention that Razor is my favorite synthesizer.
Razor is my favorite synthesizer.
So, let's move on to the dissonance effects. These things are fun. They do not change the partials volume, they change the partials frequencies in different ways. And you can make some ridiculous sounds with these, which are nearly impossible to create in any other synthesizer. This is ridiculously cool. Like, look at this, what's even happening right here? As for stereo effects, you've got auto pan, stereo spread, chorus, and simple pan, like the usual stuff. But then you've got reverb, reverb synced, resonant reverb, air, and unisono noise. All of these are also created using the additive engines. There is no actual reverb or any noise being created here. It's all just manipulating the partials. Lastly, we've got the dynamics and shaping module, or as I like to call it, the instant fat bassinator. Here you've got a compressor, a dirty limiter, a clip compressor, a saturator, which is not actually a saturator, a clipper and a rectifier. Whatever the hell that means. These are all just different distortion and compression modules. And what do you expect? Of course, they all sound very good. So let's talk about modulation. Beneath each parameter, you've got a bunch of modulation rings. If you click on them, all the modulation options will show up. You've got amplitude envelope, envelope 2, envelope 3, LFO1, LFO2, sidechain, echo step, then a bunch of MIDI modulation such as velocity, mod wheel, pitch bend, aftertouch, and key track. Lastly, there's filter track and pitch track. So, what's sidechain modulation? Well, in this synthesizer, it's just mixing two types of modulation together. In the bottom right corner, you find the little module for that. And now I hear you saying, wait, isn't sidechaining usually using an audio signal to control a plugin's parameters? Yes. Another great thing about Razer is that everything is animated. Like you can see exactly what a modulation source is doing to the parameter you assign it to. So let's talk about deep modulation. And by that I mean modulation that is already built into the filter types. Yes, some of the filter types in this synthesizer are auto-modulated. Some of those modulations are linked to the LFOs or envelopes. My favorite one being waterbed. Now, I have no idea what's happening here, but it looks and sounds very cool. So let's move on to macros. If you click the macros button, you'll find your 8 different macros. As you can see, these macros can only be assigned to the specific modules they are designed for. You cannot assign an oscillator macro to a filter, for instance. This is a bit limiting, but honestly, you get over it very quickly. Another thing I'd like to mention about the macros. For some reason, it is very difficult to assign the macros right from the synthesizer itself. So in order to set them up easier, you go to the B tab of the synthesizer and set them up from there. For some reason, this works a lot better than trying to set them up from the macro page itself. So let's talk about the last and least important part of this synthesizer, the spectral clip and safe bass modules. The spectral clip cuts off partials that are louder than a specific threshold or above a certain cutoff frequency. The safe bass option is just a sub-bass oscillator which gets added to the synth post all of the modulation and effects options. Because unfortunately Razer's engine makes it so that during the processing of a certain sound, sometimes bass gets lost during the process. In order to compensate for that, they added the safe bass option. So there you have it. That's Native Instruments Razer. In my opinion, one of the most fun and underrated synthesizers out there. Despite its limitations, which are mostly just the lack of a graph envelope, this synthesizer has a lot of cool stuff. Razer is also extremely easy to learn because you can see everything that's happening in the big spectrum up top. As well as that, all of the modulation parameters are animated. So learning how modulation actually works is really easy in Razer because you can see everything that's happening. On top of that, it is way more powerful than many people realize. So, if you're looking for a synthesizer that does a lot of cool stuff very easily, is very easy to learn and is made out of eye candy, give Razer a chance. But know that it does have some limitations.
Native Instruments, please add a graph envelope to Razer. It would literally make this the best synth ever made. Please, please do it. Oh my god, please. I'm begging you guys. Come on, please.